Hi, Tony from All the Remote Things here, and I'm here with Jeff Smith after some trials and tribulations. How are you today, Jeff?
Yeah, really good. How you doing, Tony?
Great. We had all the technical problems you could ask for to get this going, so we'll try and make sure it's all working pretty well. Jeff, would you like to introduce yourself for everyone?
Yeah, sure. Tony, thanks. I'm Jeff Smith. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at World Fuel Services. We're a $50 billion energy management company that buys and sells and manages the logistics of any type of energy, in close to 200 countries around the world.
Brilliant. And how we know each other. Uh, I have had the pleasure to work for Jeff for quite some time in a little company we used to work for, where Jeff did the agile transformation of the place. And the reason I got Jeff on is because there's so much experience in this kind of stuff that I really wanted to get the benefit of his experience out so people could hear some of this stuff that we went through. Um, Jeff, you started your journey in Telstra and
Mhm.
traversed your way to the organisation, which was Suncorp that I worked for. Just talk a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I went, I came to Australia originally for just a 3-year assignment, ended up staying 13 and becoming a dual citizen. And at Telstra, I kind of really learned a lot about, you are the company you keep. And we had this principle about work with others you aspire to be like, not necessarily like yourself. And I got to know some people at NetApp, and looked at kind of transforming infrastructure and using, storage that, was, 30% of the cost of what our traditional partners were. But what I learned more was that the reason they were great companies, they had a great leadership system. And I went and ran a little startup for a couple of years, and I discovered agile practices. And I've had this dream since 2007, Tony, when I went to Suncorp, which is, is it possible to have the pace and innovation of the best small tech companies, but the scale of a big enterprise? And so you and I met there 2007, a long time ago. A lot of people are still starting their agile journey, and I'm sitting there thinking, geez, that was a long time ago for us. But our concept behind it was making culture tangible. If you can make it something that you can learn, you can practice, you can measure, then you can get better at it. And we did an awful lot in the 7 years I was there, to go from very entry level to breaking culture into a lot of practices, training, coaching, measuring our results, being one of the very first customers for AWS and Atlassian. And it was really neat. We did the same thing. We were open to listening and learning from others. And that was fantastic times. A highlight of my career, really, with those seven years there.
Yeah, highlight of mine, I'm quite forthright about, and many of the other agile coaches that I worked with will say absolutely the same thing. The highlight, and as a testament to the culture that you created, many of those leaders, many of those people, and people that have worked there have gone on to very very great careers, Jeff. So I think that's a fantastic thing. You went from there, and then you went into IBM, and then from IBM you've moved into the world fuels. Just talk to me a little bit about that jump from going from there to this big company, IBM. How was
Well,
that?
it was weird. It was 2014, and I was hired for two purposes, really: to lead the agile transformation across IBM, which has 400,000 people, as well as run the CIO organization, where I had 25,000 people. And my assumption going in is, in a big company, that you automatically are going to have lots of technical skills and advanced practices. And I was dead wrong. I mean, culture wise, Suncorp was really ahead of IBM. And I realized that, some of that recipe is still the same. You still need a playbook. You still need coaches. You still need to learn skills to break big problems into small problems, and then multi-process that through squads. So we had a very similar, org design proposition. We had the same concept behind. We didn't call it an agile academy at that, but it was, practices and coaching, to sit there and say, hey, can we make a material difference in the way that we're, delivering solutions? And can we, again, that dream was going like, can I actually get the scale of an IBM and the innovation of the tech companies? And we did a lot of neat things with zero touch provisioning of Mac devices, which became, really the first big company to do imageless, provisioning, and making it, seamless. And then I became across other great companies like Box and Zoom and Slack and leveraged, leadership practices from them and other things. And I think that was the thing really learned at IBM was that, when you're behind in all the tech, you just can't, depend on the people around you. You have to reach out and find the up and comers and look at what they do well and find and pick the company, not the product. So I think that's what we did. We're like, who's the best run companies? And if we pick them, we'll find a way to use them and we'll learn more. And, both sides should always benefit outside of the commercial arrangement. That's always been a principle of mine that, it shouldn't just be, we shouldn't be takers, we should be, givers and contributors as well. And so that's what I learned is that you can scale leadership and you can scale things, but, you have to have, a real playbook for doing that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. Before I jump into that, I just hark a little bit back to the Suncorp versus that journey, because one of the things that's a real lean mindset, right? Is that the TPS lean was if you're
Mm-hmm.
the right suppliers and you work in the same way, and it's that beneficial thing. And I remember going to India and working with some of the companies over there to train them in our agile way. And the benefit of that when we had them then joining us as an organization was tenfold, and it changed the culture. Actually, it changed the us and them culture. It was really then became us. Many of those people I still see and talk to over the many years. So that thing you're talking about there, I don't see a lot of organisations doing. But I think if anyone's listened to that, that's such a key factor in what we do.
Well, it's interesting, Tony. Think about it. I'd forgotten about this, but we really pioneered distributed agile because we just didn't have the capacity in Australia, but we made, the likes of ThoughtWorks and Wipro and IBM even setting their offices up. We wanted them to be the same. We wanted, at that point, it was Skype TVs. We wanted them connected. We wanted to give them complete units of work and not, a traditional waterfall approach of building requirements, sending it to someone else, have them build it and test it, send it back. No, we wanted them to own it. And actually, that's what got me the opportunity at IBM, because the CEO visited Shanghai, where we had our center there from IBM, and they had the highest engagement score across IBM, the highest metrics. And she was just stunned at, well, why in the world? Why is this so unique? Well, it was unique because we implanted our culture, not just inside of Australia and Suncorp, but on other partners. And I thought, that was really, we were really, we had a lot of conviction, right? We started with, also agile maturity assessments, right? To say it's important to give signals to the squads. They need to know how to get better. And we started doing that. And we did the same thing with our partners in India and China. And I think, we were very good at learning and adjusting, and even, really pioneering CI/CD, continuous delivery, on packages, on a software platform. And I think for me, I learned a lot as a leader working for our CEO, Patrick Snowball, because he came in and said, Jeff, we can't afford to fix every problem. So the very first thing we're going to do is have a fixed capacity, and we're going to focus on the general insurance business because that generates capital. The bank consumes it. We'll focus on them first. We'll come to banking a couple of years later. And I think that's one of the hardest things most companies have is it's always easy to start stuff. It's much harder to stop it and to say, we're only going to focus on this part of the business because, of course, some part of our business wasn't happy about it, but we got better. We consolidated our insurance platforms and great digital front end, great mobile, platforms. And then we went and did something else. I learned a lot about, it is really important. And like on measurements on WIP, cycle time and WIP, people can hold about 3 things in short-term memory. So the best thing to do is be focused on a few things and flow that the flow and distribution of work should be at the pace that optimizes the throughput and velocity of the teams. And I think I learned a lot working with Patrick and actually being in a walking off the cliff moment, right? We were in the middle of a financial crisis. What are we going to do? We had to do something great, and we had to do it fast.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that succinctly because I happened to be on the floor where that was all sequestered and happening at the time. So it was, and it was a testament to the culture that we built, that we were able to take that and run with it and get ourselves on the front foot. Let's jump forward into that playbook conversation and leadership conversation. So let's jump another bit forward into where you are now, which is World Fuels, and you've wrought a very, it's well known, you've wrought a very great digital transformation there, and you've taken this learnings that we just talked about, which is why I wanted to do that, because it brings us to where we are. You talk about leadership, and for me, as I traverse organizations across the world, leadership is still struggling with the concept of how they apply agility at scale to an organization. So if I'm those leaders asking you, what are your top hitters in that they could take on?
Well, I think that the one thing is I recognize the focus at Suncorp, because we had to start with the people doing the work. So we focused a lot on how do you form your squads, how do we get the work, to them, and how do we measure the right things so that they get better. It was very much around focusing on the people doing the work. What I didn't do so well was focus on the people leading the work. So that hit me that, if we have agile maturity assessments on squads, could we do something similar on leaders? And I started to do this at IBM, but I really went after it at World Fuel. And by the way, World Fuel has like 11 Australians, there in very senior positions. It brought me, a reason I bring that up, Tony, is you said a lot of people have gone out to do different work. There's people that came to work for me that, Josh McLean and, Richard DeLissa and stuff that were, they didn't work directly for me at Suncorp. They were maybe a few levels down, but then all of a sudden I see them years later. I'm like, they're better leaders than me. So we said, we've got to do the same thing on the leadership side, which is make it something you can learn, you can practice, and you can measure. So the thing we've come up with, and this is the biggest learning on the leaders, is a leadership maturity assessment and moderation, where we, in the same time that we measure and give signals to the squads, we do the same thing for all leaders. And it's the same leadership system, whether you're an entry level squad leader or you're a senior exec. And there's 6 dimensions of leadership we think are really important that every quarter we go through, and every leader has to stand up in front of their peers and say, here are my leaders and here's how they're doing. Think of it as red, yellow, green. Are you mature? Are you in the middle? Or are you struggling? But the 6 dimensions are, what's the effectiveness of forming diverse teams? And then it hit me when I meet different like professional, coaches and stuff. And they say, how come we spend like 70% of our time forming the right team, and you guys go and put a team together through a project, and by saying numbers like 2 BAs, a couple engineers, a test, a project manager? I said, that's not a team. Those are just people. And it hit me that, spending the time to form diverse teams that chemistry works is really important. So that's one dimension. The second is distributing work at the right pace. I'm big on this because I think if the leader's job is to create a productive work environment, give clarity of purpose, and get out of the way, they have to be very good at limiting the noise into their squads. So that concept of distributing work is important. And then measuring what matters. Now that can be different. I manage the financial operations like I did at Suncorp, as well as the IT. So those measures may be a bit different for a delivery squad than it is for a financial operations or invoicing squad, but they still have measures that are important for them. So those are 3 outcome measures. And then we have 3 behavioral measures, which are where's, that leader's ability to attract and develop talent. And these are all evidence-based, right? Because I can go and say, well, this person, they brought in 4 new people. There's 5 people in line trying to get in. Or conversely, it could be, people exiting and no one wanting to come. So, that attracting is a very evidence-based, observation-based. It's not fluffy. It's real. And then the second of those behaviorals is listen, learn, and leverage. That is the hardest one, Tony, to get across and to really build inside of big companies, because people think they know everything. It's 7 billion people in the world. Someone's just bested your best practice. And my example of someone that excelled at that at IBM was, Fletcher Previn, who took this Mac at IBM. And I said, I'm going to introduce you to the CIO at Apple, but you're going to have to be mature enough to figure out, why don't we just copy and see how they provision these things? And if we can do that, we can lower the cost of it to the point where I can afford to give it to IBMers at the same price as a PC. So, you want that canvas to be wide. It's okay to learn from others in your squad. It's much better to learn across, and it's even better if you're learning externally. So that listen, learn, and leverage is really the one that's the hardest to get good at. My experience, independent of whether you're an IT or a back office function or a sales function, it's hard. And then the last one is in impact and influence. And the same piece there is your impact just what you own, or is it bigger? And so that measure is still relevant, whether you're an entry level squad leader or a senior exec. If you're a senior exec, like me, is my influence beyond the COO org or not? And if you're an entry level squad leader, is it beyond your squad or not? So it's still important. And so we do those 6 dimensions every quarter on every leader. And then we add one seventh one, which is a net promoter score. And we ask 2 questions. Would you recommend your leader to an outside colleague? Would you recommend your squad to an outside colleague? And then so those 7 things are signals that we give leaders every quarter. So we have a leadership system that is what we do quarterly. And of course, I do my other pieces of my system, or I do a monthly town hall where I do a fireside chat with an executive from outside the company so that people can learn from them. We do fortnightly strategy reviews. Every other week we'll do a operational review. I'll do a podcast once a month. I mean, I've got my leadership system, but I think the core to operationalize culture at the leadership level is that quarterly leadership maturity assessment that matches for leaders. And by the way, it gives leaders credibility that, hey, they're willing to measure themselves, because they should do that if you're willing to measure the people that work for you. So I think it has a fairness component to it as well.
The other thing I heard you saying in there was about the sticky teams or persistent teams or whatever you want to call those things these days. There's about a million names, so we used to call them sticky teams. But and off air, we were talking about, you're very strong about making sure that those teams stay together. Talk to me a bit about that, how important that's been on the journey, because I think that's another thing that organizations struggle with. They say, we're going to create these persistent teams, we're going to fund them. And then the minute a crisis hits, they pull them apart and, it all goes pear-shaped.
And it's important to keep teams together and let the teams pull from the backlog. If you want to run and if you want to be able to multi-process, the key leadership wise is to take a big problem, break it into smaller problems, and then give it to the right leaders to put in the backlogs of their squads and let the squads pull. And then if you can start to measure, how much you're getting through, and it's predictable. Predictability is everything, about, is this thing going to get done on time? Well, it is. If the pace and the throughput of your squads and they're dedicated, then it's actually it's not a rocket science experiment. But most companies screw this up because what they do is say, we've got a project, so we're going to form these things just for a project. So they pull teams apart. And listen, the first 6 months people work together, they're not very good. Right? It doesn't matter what you're in. So you need time together. And what happens is most people put together for a project, and by the time they get really productive and the chemistry is working, they break them apart again. So I think are you going to run a product mindset, which we had started that at Suncorp, right? And now you hear a lot about product ownership, product management. Shoot, we were doing that 12 years ago. It's just amazing to me the things that are kind of happening now. So I think the concept that that product owner, product management model is really important. That a product could be something external product that you sell as a SaaS offering for customers. It could also be an internal system like Salesforce. That's a product to us. It has a roadmap. It has functional features, operational requirements, and we treat that like a product, and it has a product owner. And that, so you keep that squad together and you make sure you have a product owner that, has a commercial lens on how these features are important, but also is good about, giving a clean, groomed backlog so those squads could work well. So a big, advocate, a unit of measure shouldn't be a person. It should be a squad. That should be the minimum thing that you budget for. And, I think, you learn by doing things together. And if you have a minimal amount of time, no matter how gifted you are, that's, you're more on the learning than the throughput curve. So I think that's most companies. And by the way, Tony, they don't get that, they think that, they can have practices independent of how they form their teams and distribute the work. And that, in my experience, doesn't work well.
Yeah, and that's why I asked the question, because I see that, and you're right. We were doing that a long time ago, and as I sort of have been on this journey over the last 6 years since I left that organisation, you see it across the world. It's not just singularly here or there. It's something that people struggle with, and that's why I wanted to ask that question. The other thing that flows through, I just want to pick a little bit is we hear a lot about the continuous improvement or the innovation mindset. Now, that's something I've experienced working with you. How vital that was to us. How have you taken that now and extrapolated that into the world fuels?
I think something I'm doing better now, just from learning over the years, is how critical it is to have aspirational targets and measurable outcomes that everyone understands. So, we kind of get behind OKRs, which, came from, John Doerr and stuff. But the key piece of that is, here's an objective as measured by. So, we just drill this as measured by into people. We want it to be something, we want an aspirational target to hit because it'll force us to think differently. We always got constraints. The biggest constraint is never time and money. It's a constraint of thought. So we have these aspirational targets, but then we make the measure something that anyone top to bottom can understand. So something when I came into World Fuel was, we've got a good expertise in cloud. I've got Richard and Josh in here. I've got a few of our architects that came from Suncorp. I got a good chunk of people here, enough critical mass. Let's see if we can close all our data centers. Let's see if we can move everything to cloud in the next 2 to 3 years. And everyone told us why it wouldn't work. There's, or you can't decouple Oracle applications from the bus and all that, everything what wouldn't work. And so what happens, you spend all your energy on, analyzing what won't work and what will, as opposed to just saying, we're going to make everything work. Let's quit. Let's don't do this. And let's make the as measured by so clear that everyone understands it. Because all of a sudden, if you say we're going to move stuff to cloud, people can say, well, what stuff? Financial applications. What about this? What about your network? So our definition, Tony, was we're moving everything to cloud as defined by closing all data centers. Now, that doesn't leave any ambiguity. There's no one, you work in a data center, you work in a help desk, you know what that means. And that meant we also had to move all the telephony. We had to move all the networks. So all of a sudden, it spawned a bunch of innovation because we thought, how do we do this in 2 to 3 years? Well, we better, get off the carriers and see if we can put this on, encrypted on a public internet with SD-WAN, get lots of connectivity to all locations around the world so that throughput's not a problem. Because now the concept of a corporate network goes away. Now you're just talking internet circuits. So if you're going to just have internet circuits, you better make sure you got a lot of capacity and you're not hopping all over the world. So we had to solve that problem. We went to Zoom telephony, AWS Connect for our call centers. So our guys knew, every single person knew what that meant. That when you say you're going to close all data centers, there's no like, what does that mean? Everyone knows exactly. And we had another one, which was digitize all of our content as defined by no printers. So we knew that we had these big commercial printers. We were printing 500,000 invoices a month. And I went down in Costa Rica and I saw that. And we're very visual, Tony. So we take a picture of all that. And I said, I'm going to come back a year from now. I went, all that paper gone. Well, guess what? That meant you had to digitize, you had to have OCR to pull it in and pull the data. You had to have robotics to get it into your financial systems and run the transactions. But a year later, we came back, no paper, and we kind of like took a gun to the commercial printers. So I think what I really learned was set really high targets, really high bar with short timeframes. It forces you into things you wouldn't normally consider, have a good congestion of talent that can handle that and make it so measurable. There's just no, and the thing is, it's better to shoot for the star and hit the moon. So we didn't get every data center closed in 2 years, but we got 21 of 23 closed in 2 years. And now we're on the last 2. We'll be the first global company to have, completely taken, I'm not talking about just cloud. We're talking about in applications, we're talking about networks and telephony and things like that, and actually physically not having data centers. And I think it's such a neat thing because we all can, I think you lived through it at Suncorp, Tony. I mean, our experiences you carry with you the rest of your life. No one can take them away from you. And we had a great experience because the company did better, the employees did better, the customers did better. And that's the feeling we're getting with setting these targets and finding ways to hit it. And I think it's funny. Once you solve 2 or 3 problems, the next big one doesn't look so bad. And you hear a lot about failing fast. That's great. But to be honest, I think success works too. So if you can make something work, the next time you try something, you make that. The next big problem that comes up, I'm telling you, the anxiety is not there because we're like, oh, we've solved this. That doesn't look so hard. Let's try that. So I think that I learned, I've had a chance to get some very seasoned people that were great leaders great technical talent, enough congestion that we could try things that I normally wouldn't try.
And I'm living proof of that particular mindset of yours because, and I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but we were the first organisation in Australia to create mobile phone banking. And there was a
Yep.
crew of us that put that up to you. And to set the target high in small timeframes, and that's what just reminded me of that, because I can remember sitting in the CEO's office and showing him this mock-up, which really didn't have that much behind it. We hadn't really figured out the rest of it. And he said, "This is great. How do when can we have this?" And you straight off the gun just went 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And the four of us that were there nearly fell off our chairs. But the thing being was, you set that target, you set it high, and you set the time frame. We had to go back, and we actually did do it. It wasn't pretty, and it probably didn't have all the bells and whistles. And it didn't have all the bells and whistles, but we were out to market first, and we hit it. And so, living testament to what Jeff's talking about, you can do it, right?
Well, I think the other thing, Tony, is also to listen to people to see what is possible. And we would listen to good counsel. We talked to some people at ThoughtWorks. We talked to people at AWS. We just didn't invent it. You have to kind of test, your concept and say, hey, if I get into this one, will I have someone have my back?
Yeah.
And can we figure it out? But, related to mobile phones, I don't know if you remember, we were also Apple's first customer of iPhones on a corporate network.
Yeah.
That hadn't been done before because it was, well, you can't do it because you can't control the content. You can't delete the content remotely. That what was available on a BlackBerry wasn't available. And in 2008, we had a graduate figure that out, how to build something. I don't even remember. He was like, "Hi, I figured out how to do this." And I'm like, well, shit, we could be the first company in the world that puts an iPhone on a corporate network. And so again, today that's like a no-brainer. People are like, well, of course it works on a corporate network. But in 2007, when it was released in 2008, that was a bar that no one wanted to try, because BlackBerry was, that's why it was called Crackberry, right? That's what every company's employees had. But we were first to do that, and I was so proud of someone. It wasn't our idea. It was actually, a graduate that said, "Hey, I figured out how to remotely, delete the content so we can it can be a managed device." So I think that's it's pretty. We really, we tried a bunch of different things, and by the way, 95% of it worked.
Yeah, interesting. And it was a great segue because, I said I had the two things. And the second thing that I was going to ask you about literally was I think one of the great superpowers that we had was the graduate program. We had, graduates from the local Queensland University of Technology. I think there was America. I can't remember which one it was, but we had an American.
My university, Miami University.
There you go, Miami University. There you go. And we linked to that. We had graduates, and interestingly enough, those graduates that I knew of at those times, many of those have gone on to greater things as well. And I think that was one of our innovative superpowers, was bringing in that kind of energy as well on a recirculative basis. Are you still doing that sort of thing?
Oh yeah. Yeah. You bet. I mean, listen, we had the largest graduate program in Australia because we were pulling from Monash, we were pulling from University of Sydney, from QUT. And then we experimented with an external just to give kids a chance to meet people from other countries, and that actually worked really well. We even did Aviva was not competing with us in insurance, but we did a secondment of people from Aviva working with us in Sydney, and for 6 months. It was extraordinary things we tried. But even today, Tony, the biggest graduate program in South Florida, where our headquarters is, comes from us. It was the same at IBM. I started believe it or not, IBM did not have a graduate program.
Wow.
I just couldn't believe that. I thought, what's happened? There's a reason everyone there was a little bit elevated in age, because we weren't bringing in and refreshing with newer talent, which led to product decline and other issues. So I started it there, and that's always worked. I think that's, we gotta back our young people, and then, they teach us things, we teach them, we kind of stay a bit vibrant.
Yeah, they're just a brilliant resource for innovation and energy. The vibe, they come in, untainted by the layers of corporate work, corporate world, and come with new ideas. So I think that's fantastic. Look, Jeff, we're getting very close to the end of our time. One thing I just wanted to mention was you are coming home, sort of. because you've been away for quite, so we call it home. I know you're American,
Yep.
but we call it home for you. You're going back to Australia on a basis. It's just been announced you're joining the board of ANZ.
Mhm.
Thoughts on that? Give me the message on what you're intending to sort of bring to the table.
Well, I mean, one, it's good. It gets me back regularly into, Australia, which I think is great. But ANZ has, a great potential. And banking right now is, you've got a lot of things going on. You've got DeFi, you've got blockchain, you've got crypto, you've got fintech, and it's really neat. And I really like it because there's a lot of really sharp people on the board, and good executives that want to do some great things, and half of winning is wanting to do something really aspirational and then figuring out what's the most efficient way to do it and what's the talent required. But I'm super, super excited to be to be nominated to be on the board. It's fantastic. I was, an advisor to, to the board a few years ago, but, this is a full board of directors role, and I start that up in August, and really looking forward to it.
Yeah, brilliant. We're going to be happy to see you come home.
Yeah, me.
So we're really at the end of our time. There's lots more I could ask you. Maybe that's time for another one. We might do another cast eventually. How can people, if they want to talk to you about any of this, because I know you do a lot of mentoring, leadership during board, how can people get in touch with you? How can they touch base, Jeff?
Easiest way is either LinkedIn, send me, a message on LinkedIn, or my Gmail, which is very simple, jpsmitty, jpsmitty at gmail.com. And that's easiest way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, and one of the great things Jeff does, I know I'm doing a bit of a plug here, but Jeff will talk to executives and organisations as well. I just had him in at a client of mine just recently, just to talk to them about those experiences. So don't hesitate to hit him up for that. I've just stopped you in, Jeff, of course. So if you're listening to this and you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, all the remote things on YouTube. And don't forget our Remote AF community now that we have it running. So just go to remoteaf.co, click the community button and join that for all things remote. Jeff, it's been fantastic to have you on. Thank you for giving us your time today.
No, thanks, Tony. It's been my pleasure.
Cheers.
Cheers.